Another day, another story. On the eve of its 160th anniversary, take a look back at history's most celebrated cavalry charge. A major conflict of the 19th century, the Crimean War claimed at least 500,000 lives and had a profound impact on such renowned personalities as British nurse Florence Nightingale and Russian author Leo Tolstoy. Welcome to Tabo Eminent Channel. It got its start in and around Jerusalem, then part of the Ottoman Empire, where Orthodox Christian and Catholic monks had been engaging in fierce, sometimes deadly brawls for years over, who would control various holy sites. Following one such violent squabble in 1852, Tsar Nicholas I of Russia, a self-proclaimed defender of Orthodox Christianity, demanded the right to exercise protection over the Ottoman Empire's millions of Christian subjects. Upon being rejected, he then sent his army, the largest in the world, to occupy two Ottoman principalities in present-day Romania. The Tsar also purportedly had his eyes on Constantinople, the Ottoman capital, which if taken would give his navy unfettered access to the Mediterranean Sea. Unnerved by this expansionism, Britain and France sent their own warships to the area and vowed to defend Ottoman sovereignty. Fighting officially broke out in October 1853, and the following month the Russians decimated the Ottoman fleet in a surprise attack. But although Nicholas referred to the declining Ottoman Empire as the sick man of Europe, his land forces made little progress in their push south, underscored by the failed siege of a fortress in present-day Bulgaria. Meanwhile, in March 1854, Britain and France declared war and immediately bombarded the then Russian city of Odessa. With Austria likewise threatening to jump into the fray, Nicholas withdrew from Romania. Rather than declare victory, however, Britain and France decided to punitively target the Russian naval base in Sevastopol, located on the Crimean Peninsula. On September 13, 1854, a joint Allied force of over 60,000 troops sailed into Calamita Bay, about 33 miles north of their objective. Due to stormy weather, it took 5 days for them to fully disembark. Believing the conflict would be over quickly, they brought neither winter clothing nor medical supplies. They moreover lacked accurate maps, had little idea how many Russian troops opposed them, and flouted the dietary restrictions of the Muslim Ottoman soldiers within their ranks. To make matters worse, a cholera outbreak erupted. Nonetheless, the British and French defeated the Russians in their first run-in near the Alma River, causing a panicked retreat with the help of their long-range Minié rifles. They then commenced a roundabout march to Sevastopol, where they spent 2.5 weeks digging trenches and lugging artillery into position prior to initiating a bombardment of the city on October 17. By that time, however, the Russians had significantly strengthened their defenses. After holding out for 8 days, they tried to break the siege with a dawn attack on Britain's supply base in the nearby fishing village of Balaclava. That morning, having forced Ottoman troops to abandon 4 defensive redoubts, they were able to occupy the Causeway Heights just outside town. But they failed to progress any further thanks to a regiment of Scottish Highlanders and the Heavy Brigade, each of which repelled a Russian advance. With Balaclava now safe, Lord Fitzroy Somerset Raglan, the British commander-in-chief in Crimea, turned his attention back to the Causeway Heights, where he believed the Russians were attempting to make off with some of his artillery guns. He ordered the cavalry, consisting of both the heavy and light brigades, to advance with infantry support and take advantage of any opportunity to recover the lost ground. Lord Raglan expected the cavalrymen to move immediately, with the infantry to come later. But George Bingham, the Earl of Lucan, who commanded the cavalry, thought he wanted them to attack together. As a result, Lucan's men sat around for 45 minutes waiting for the infantry to arrive. At that point, Raglan issued a new order, telling the cavalry to advance rapidly to the front and try to prevent the enemy carrying away the guns. From his vantage point, however, Lucan could not see any guns being removed. Confused, he asked Raglan's aide-de-camp where to attack, but instead of pointing to the Causeway Heights, the aide allegedly waved his arm in the direction of a Russian artillery battery at the far end of an exposed valley. Lucan next approached his brother-in-law James, Brudenell, the Earl of Cardigan, who commanded the Light Brigade. The two men loathed each other so much they were barely on speaking terms. And neither was apparently respected by the troops. One officer in the Light Brigade went so far as to call them both fools. "Cardigan," he wrote in a letter home, "has as much brains as my boot. He is only equalled in want of intellect by his relation the Earl of Lucan." Though perturbed by Raglan's order, Lucan and Cardigan obeyed it without first checking back in to make sure they understood it correctly. At their bidding, the roughly 670 members of the Light Brigade drew their sabers and lances and began their infamous mile and a quarter-long charge with Russians shooting at them from three directions, though never from all three at once. The first man to fall was Raglan's aide-de-camp. Another soldier then had his head clean carried off by a round shot, yet for about 30 yards further the headless body kept in the saddle, according to a survivor. Other survivors spoke of being splattered with horseblood, of watching their companions lose limbs, of seeing brains on the ground and of going through smoke so thick it was like riding into the mouth of a volcano. The Heavy Brigade, which, its name notwithstanding, resembled the Light Brigade except with regard to uniform color, was supposed to follow in support, but only went a short way down the valley, before Lucan directed it to turn back. Somehow, the Light Brigade reached its destination anyway, crashing into the enemy lines with a vengeance. A few Russians even shot at their own comrades, in a desperate bid to clear an escape route. The Light Brigade's members didn't hold the ground for long, though, before being forced to stagger back from whence they came. En route, Russian artillery pounded away again from the causeway heights, but not from the other two sides, as the Light Brigade had taken out one battery itself, and the French had taken out another, while Russian cavalrymen attempted to entrap them. In the end, of the roughly 670 Light Brigade soldiers, about 110 were killed and 160 were wounded, a 40% casualty rate. They also lost approximately 375 horses. Despite failing to overrun Balaclava, the Russians claimed victory in the battle, parading their captured artillery guns through Sebastopol. Yet they would surrender the city and naval base nearly a year later, after which they agreed to give up a small chunk of territory, and to keep their warships out of the Black Sea in exchange for peace. Meanwhile, the Light Brigade's exploits had already become legendary in Britain, thanks largely to Alfred Tennyson's poem, The Charge of the Light Brigade. Named Poet Laureate a few years earlier by Queen Victoria, he praised the bravery of the men as they rode into the Valley of Death. His poem The Charge of the Heavy Brigade at Balaclava, on the other hand, never quite captured the public's imagination. The Charge of the Light Brigade refers to a military action that took place during the Crimean War on October 25, 1854. The poem of the same name, written by Alfred, Lord Tennyson, in 1854, commemorates the ill-fated charge of the British Light Brigade at the Battle of Balaclava during the Crimean War, 1853 to 1856. The Crimean War was fought between the Russian Empire and an alliance of France, Britain, the Ottoman Empire, and Sardinia. The Battle of Balaclava was one of the engagements in this conflict. The charge of the Light Brigade occurred when a miscommunication led British cavalry to charge directly into heavily fortified Russian positions. The Light Brigade, consisting of around 670 cavalrymen, received ambiguous orders to attack the Russian artillery positions. Due to misunderstandings and a lack of clear communication, the brigade charged into a valley, directly facing well-defended Russian artillery and infantry. The charge was disastrous, resulting in high casualties for the British forces. Despite the miscommunication and the heavy losses suffered by the Light Brigade, the courage and valor displayed by the soldiers became legendary. Tennyson's poem, published just weeks after the event, helped immortalize the bravery of the cavalrymen, portraying the charge as a symbol of heroism in the face of adversity. Here are the famous opening lines of the poem. Half a league, half a league, half a league onward, all in the valley of death rode the 600. Forward, the Light Brigade. charge for the guns. He said, "The charge of the Light Brigade is remembered as a tragic episode in military history, highlighting the consequences of miscommunication and the cost of war. The charge of the Light Brigade at the Battle of Balaclava was a result of a miscommunication between the British commanders in the field. The orders were sent by the overall commander, Lord Raglan, to the cavalry commander, Lord Lucan. However, the orders were not entirely clear, and there was confusion about which Russian guns were to be attacked. The original order was for the Light Brigade to prevent the Russians from removing captured guns from overrun Turkish positions. However, due to a series of misunderstandings and misinterpretations, the Light Brigade was mistakenly directed to charge directly at the heavily fortified Russian positions. The Light Brigade consisted of 3 regiments, the 13th Light Dragoons, the 17th Lancers, and the 11th Hussars. The brigade, under the command of Major General James Brunel, 7th Earl of Cardigan, began its charge down the valley, directly into the face of the Russian artillery and infantry. They were exposed to withering fire from both sides, and the odds were heavily against them. The Russian artillery fired deadly volleys, and the Light Brigade suffered significant casualties. Despite the overwhelming odds and the chaos of the situation, the cavalrymen pressed on with incredible bravery. They managed to reach the Russian guns and engaged in fierce hand-to-hand combat with the enemy artillery crews. The charge was a desperate and costly effort. Of the approximately 670 men who started the charge, more than 110 were killed, around 160 were wounded, and nearly 60 were taken prisoner. The Light Brigade had suffered a devastating blow, and the audacity of the charge captured the imagination of the public. The charge of the Light Brigade became famous not only for the courage displayed by the soldiers but also for the tragic futility of the mission. The miscommunication and confusion surrounding the orders were widely criticized, and the incident contributed to changes in military communication protocols to prevent similar errors in the future. Despite the initial criticism, the soldiers of the Light Brigade were eventually hailed as heroes, and Tennyson's poem played a significant role in shaping public perception of the event. The charge of the Light Brigade remains a symbol of valor and sacrifice in the face of adversity, even in the midst of a military blunder. Thanks for watching. Request you to subscribe the channel.